So for some foundations, their decision will be we feel loyal to our current grantees and we want to stick with them. And their inclination will be, well, we've got 10 grantees, we have 20% less money, we'll just give them all 20% less. And I would argue that that falls into too much of a scarcity mentality and it's too blunt an instrument. So first, the real question is, will these organizations survive if you give them 80% of what you might have given them before? Maybe one of them will survive if they get 120,000, not 100. Maybe 3 of them won't survive at all, even if you give them 80. And so investing the staff time and the due diligence to understand the financial viability of the organizations is crucial, so we don't end up throwing good money after bad. If the funder determines that, well, we still want to proceed, we still want to fund all 10 or 20 of those organizations, I've been struck by the opportunity that also exists to step back and say, I'm going to look at the whole sector that I fund in. I'm not just going to fund these 10 groups. I'm going to think, what could I do for the sector as a whole? And I remember in 2001, after September 11th and the market decline, Rabbi Rachel Cowan, who was rabbi at the Cummings Foundation, program officer at the Cummings Foundation at the time, she realized that she was funding a lot of Jewish innovation. She didn't have new funds for them, but instead she funded a management and leadership training program that benefited the whole sector. 7, 8 years later, that program, we now run that program. It's called the Sella Leadership Program, and it's trained over 200 leaders. But in the moment, it came from her analysis that she couldn't solve the philanthropic challenge group by group. She had to solve it for the entire sector. So we hope that foundations will think about a more nuanced approach to understanding the financial condition of each organization, a sectoral approach when they look at all the organizations in the field and how can they build the whole field. And then finally, we're urging people to shift from a more program-based funding to more general support funding. What we've seen is, and the example I use comes out of the private sector, that if you have stock in General Electric and you think things are wobbly there, you wouldn't say to the CEO of General Electric, I only want light bulbs with my stock, I don't want any NBC. You would say, well, I trust General Electric to figure out how to run the company, particularly in bleak times, and give them the resources they need to do it. What happens too often in philanthropy is that people restrict, heavily restrict, how the CEO or the exec can use the resources. That's one thing to do in a growth moment, but in a moment of contraction, we need to give the CEOs the creativity and the space to innovate that they need, and it's very hard for them to do with program-restricted funding. And so even if you're going to stick with your same set of grantees, and even if you're going to cut them all by 20%, giving them some space to be more creative about how they spend those funds can make all the difference in their success. I think ultimately this approach to philanthropy is one where we say, instead of, well, I used to have 10 million to give away and now I only have 8, instead we say, I have 8 million to give away, right? And that's a lot of money. And what could I do with my 8 million if I started with a blank slate? And our hope is that starting with the blank slate approach moves us into a more creative and dynamic worldview rather than a fearful circle the wagons one, because it's in the more creative space, the more abundant space, that the breakthrough kind of solutions can be developed.